On today's show, we've got a little bit of a Locked On crossover between Locked On Bucks and Locked On Wolves, and it might actually be the first time we've had to do a crossover podcast because there hasn't been much to talk about over the last few seasons with these two teams together. But there's a little bit today because, for the Bucks' perspective, we want to find out a little bit more about Malik Beasley, who played his best basketball in Minnesota. And then I'm going to ask about Mike Conley as well, and perhaps just generally, what's going on with the Wolves? Where are they at heading into this season? So I'm the host of Locked On Bucks, Kane Pittman, alongside me, the host of Locked On Wolves, Ben Beecken. We're going to have some fun today. But firstly, we appreciate everyone for making Locked On Bucks or Locked On Wolves your first watch or listen of every single weekday right through the offseason as well. If you haven't done so yet, drop a comment, a like, subscribe, follow, rate, review, all those things wherever you're listening or watching to the show. It's free to do, and it really helps us. Ben, this is nice to catch up because, as I mentioned, it's been a rarity that we've been able to sit down and talk Bucks and Wolves.
Yeah, for two teams that are, Timberwolves fans like to point out that Milwaukee is the furthest West team in the Eastern Conference, and Wolves fans have been envious of being in the Eastern Conference for a long time. So, but maybe not as much this year. I mean, the top of the East was much better than the top of the West, at least in the regular season. But anyway, yeah, it's good to catch up. A little bit of a border battle that hasn't been much of a battle in a while, at least.
No, I've had some nice road trips from the Eastern Conference Milwaukee to the Western Conference Minnesota. Interesting that the conference set up as it is, as you mentioned. But the reason why I reached out to you and asked if we could do this podcast today was because we wanted to ask about Malik Beasley, who's going to be spending this season in Milwaukee. And I think the timing of this was interesting. We were asking the question on Locked On Bucks, what's going to happen with this roster? Who are the guys that are actually available? And honestly, I wasn't sure heading into this free agency what the market would be for a player like Malik Beasley. Obviously fell out of the rotation a little bit with the Lakers. So I guess that would be my first question to you. Were you surprised that Malik Beasley ended up signing a minimum deal?
I was. I mean, the Timberwolves were the team that gave him that, the one big contract he's got in his career. And the Lakers, I think, had an option that they chose not to exercise. But he was making that first year of the deal with Minnesota, like 13 plus million, and he was making 14 plus last year. And he, I was surprised. Like he didn't play to the level of what the contract was. And it was maybe a little bit of an overpay at the time, although I know that there were some critics of it because he's not a good defender, and we'll get into what his game looks like offensively. He's a little limited, but he's really good at what he does. So I thought his true value was somewhere in between. I was really surprised when he signed for a minimum deal. I think a lot of it had to do with, he hasn't really won consistently. He's been to the playoffs 3 times, I guess, 4 times maybe in his career, but the Bucks are an attractive team to play for. And the Bucks love them some 3-point shooters, and Malik Beasley fits that mold.
It is interesting once you get to that point in free agency where it's most teams have only got minimum deals left. And as you pointed to, Ben, you pick and choose where you might go. And I've got no doubt Malik Beasley doesn't turn 27 until November. So as far as the Bucks go, he's actually kind of a young player. And if I'm trying to think what he's looking at with this deal, he's saying, okay, maybe there are some rotation minutes at the guard spot. Potentially, this is a position where I can make myself some real cash if I have a strong year on a team that's hoping to contend. So from that point of view, maybe it does make some sense to come to Milwaukee.
Absolutely. And he's scored everywhere he's been. I mean, every time he's gotten minutes in a rotation, he's scored. Take out the first 2 years of his career when he was a non-rotation player in Denver. He averaged 20 points a game in the last the COVID shortened year right after being traded to Minnesota. Now it was a 14-game sample, but then the next year he was right at that 20 points a game mark again before he ended up with a hamstring injury, and then he had some legal issues and missed half the season. But there was about a calendar year there where he played in 50, 60 games and averaged 20 points per game. So there's a lot of when he gets the opportunity and he's in the right system and he gets the chance to just let it fly, he can score in bunches.
So that's a great lead in, because to me, if I look at the way he played for the Lakers, it was very different to what he was able to do and perhaps asked to do and expected to do with Minnesota. With the Lakers, there was a lot of standing in the corner and he was still getting his shots up, but it felt like when he played for Minnesota, he certainly was able to do a lot more, had the ball in his hands a little bit more and create, and just the shot profile looked completely different. So in the setting that it was in Minnesota when he's putting up those points, what type of player was he, and what was his role and expectations with the Wolves?
Yeah, he wreaks havoc in the open floor. I mean, he's absolutely one of the I this sounds hyperbolic, but he quite literally is one of the best transition players in the league because he's very, very good at the rim. He doesn't get there a lot in the half court. Like he doesn't like to put the ball on the floor in the half court and try and create for himself. He's kind of a one dribble and shoot, like a movement shooter type guy in half court. But in the open floor, he's very, very athletic. As you said, he's still fairly young. He's very fast, and his release is super quick on his jumper. So if he's out in the open floor, he's sprinting to that 3-point line, and he's going to shoot the ball. Basically, he's got really nice range too, and one of the quicker releases I've seen. And again, if he can get all the way to the rim in transition, or if he's running the break, he's happy to run to the rim too, and he's dynamic at the rim because of his athleticism. That's basically what he does. He's very good at the rim in transition. He's very good outside the arc in transition. And in the half court, he doesn't really distribute the ball a ton. You're not going to run a lot of like pick and roll with him or anything, but he's a pretty intelligent player. So he'll make a quick decision. He's not going to slow your offense down. He's either going to shoot it, he's going to pass it, or he's going to, one dribble and pass it, but he's not going to just pound the ball into the floor. He's not going to take the ball to the rim in the half court. He's kind of your quintessential like super role player in the sense that he does one thing, but he does it really, really, really well. The problem is he doesn't do much else offensively. So like, unless you're running plays for him in the offense, he does tend to just kind of stand there. And he's a clear minus defensively. The Wolves challenged him to get better, and I thought he did over the course of his 2-ish seasons in Minnesota. I can't say I paid a lot of attention to his defense in LA, but that has to be one of the reasons why he fell out of the rotation in the playoffs. Because it's spotty at best. And well, he's got the athleticism to do it. He's a little small to guard threes and even some twos. So that's the biggest issue for him is the defense.
It's going to be fascinating, obviously, with Mike Budenholzer moving out as well, because you referenced the 3-point shooting. Certainly under Bud, everyone was shooting. Whenever they were open, they were expected to let it fly. And that feels like the type of offense that he probably would have had some fun playing in. I want to ask you about the role that you think then that he can fit playing as most likely a guard coming off the bench, but playing alongside someone like Giannis when you talk about the transition game. So I've got a couple more questions on Beasley still coming up here. But first, we'll talk about our sponsor of today's show, Ibotta. And Ibotta can give you cash back on hundreds of grocery items from produce to personal care to pantry goods. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. You can either link a loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop, and you can get cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 a year. That could cover the entire shopping trip, or you could use the cash back to buy a flight you've been eyeing, the game you've been dying to go to, or perhaps just going out for dinner, which is probably the way that I would be looking at. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much, but Ibotta, you're just getting cash back, which is pretty handy stuff. So right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the app by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKED. Summer League continues to roll on for both Locked On Bucks and Locked On Wolves. I was just discussing with Ben, the Wolves, as we're recording this, he's a very generous man because they've just tipped off and he's got to get back to some Summer League basketball. But I know the Bucks have got the Nets tomorrow, so we'll have a post-game pod there as well. Is there optimism about Summer League in Wolves land, Ben?
There is, mostly because of, mostly because of Leonard Miller, who is the Wolves traded, to get a second round pick to pick him. And he's exciting, had a really nice opener. And also Josh Minott, super athletic second round pick from last year. So even though there was no first rounder this year and last year's rookies were a little, they weren't really part of the rotation. There's a couple of players that are a lot of fun to watch. At least they've only played one game so far. So but Wolves fans are excited about it.
Look, we're doing a daily podcast here, Ben. We need Summer League.
That's
we
right.
need the games.
That's right.
And we need some optimism and some excitement at this time of the year. So we're fired up about it on this show as well. What do you think Malik Beasley's role could be on this team then? I already have some concerns, and we've discussed the defensive stuff, which potentially doesn't bode well for postseason action. You already referenced that with the Lakers this year as well. What do you see as his role?
It's a great question because I mentioned earlier that he's produced when he's gotten the minutes, and he really, like his first calendar year in Minnesota. So they traded for him like a couple weeks before COVID shut down the 1920 season. And then he got into some legal trouble in the offseason. So, and then he had a pretty bad hamstring injury. So he only played in about half of the following season. But over the course of those that first calendar year in Minnesota, 50 some odd games, he averaged like 33 minutes a game and about 20 points per game. But then the following year, the Timberwolves, it was Anthony Edwards' second year, or I'm sorry, actually, yeah, I guess it was the second year. They acquired Patrick Beverley and they decided, hey, Pat Bev's going to start alongside Anthony Edwards. And you have D'Angelo Russell. So Edwards was actually starting at the 3. And that pushed Beasley to the bench. They decided their best lineup was with Beverley in the starting lineup because of Russell's defensive shortcomings, and Ant struggled defensively early on. So basically Beasley's role shrunk and he became a bench player, and he still averaged 25 minutes a game in his first, technically his third season in Minnesota. But he really struggled. Like his 3-point shooting dipped from 40% to about 37-ish%. From the floor, he was only 39%. And that was his only like full start to finish year in Minnesota. So I worry a little bit about him. And I think this is what happened a little bit in LA last year too, was he was being asked to do something very specific, which was, hey, this is your role. Come off the bench, stand in the corner, be ready when LeBron kicks the ball to you. Or, when this action, we run this action for Anthony Davis and then the ball ends up back out in your hands in the corner. And that's kind of a little bit of a catch-22 with Beasley, because he needs the minutes to be successful, but there's things he's limited enough at that you can't give him too many minutes on like a serious playoff contender. So I'm not 100% sure. Like if he can master that, and if he's maybe at the point now where he's like, and I know he's only 26, 27, but maybe he's at the point where he's like, all right, this is how I get longevity in this league, is I figure out how to be this, like you said, it's a prove it deal in a sense where maybe I shoot 42% from threes. I have a limited role, but if I do really well and we win, I can get a bigger deal next year. And if he really buys into that, he could be really dangerous as that guy who, like, you've got to run a couple plays for him off the bench. You need to get him in the game, call him a play right away, get his feet wet, get him feel like he's part of the game. If you ignore him, he's not going to be ready when the ball comes to him, and he's not going to, be successful. So I think that's kind of the key, is get him involved early off the bench. And then if he also plays with some of your, first team players, he plays with Giannis, he gets the opportunity to play with the starters. That's where you're going to see him be most successful, is kind of as like that, third, fourth option along with some of your top line players.
I'm very curious. We're discussing a lot about the two guard spot in particular. Grayson Allen has kind of started there. Wesley Matthews spent some time there, but it's kind of an open position. And there are a lot of questions about whether the Bucks, well, in my opinion, they need another point guard. They don't really have a point guard, which brings me to Mike Conley. Now, I already said this to you. Maybe I'm about to say something that you just shut down straight away and you say, this is ridiculous. But we see it from time to time. I'm sure you have it over on Locked On Wolves. There are names that get floated around and possibility of particularly veteran players that could come available. So Mike Conley, 24 mil, around 24.3 mil on his deal this year. He only spent part of the season 24 games, but if you just look straight up at the numbers, and you can tell me more, the numbers were good. What do you see Mike Conley, where do you see him ending up this year? And is it the expectation of the Wolves and what you're hearing from the team that there is no question he'll be on the team throughout this season?
Yeah, I'd be pretty shocked if they traded him. I think the only way he's moved is if things just go terrible in the first half of the season and they're selling at the trade deadline, which of course then there's bigger problems and Cat would be gone at that point and everything. Like Mike Conley was really, really good when the Wolves got him. It was almost like he had a bit of a rebirth. A couple of years ago, he was an all-star in Utah. And then the last year and a half or so, he struggled with the Jazz. It just wasn't, everybody was like, oh, well, he's 36 or whatever. Maybe this is the end of the road. It was like he was revitalized coming over to Minnesota and he played really well. He fits Minnesota because D'Angelo Russell obviously is a shoot first point guard, and you have Anthony Edwards, you have Karl-Anthony Towns, you add Rudy Gobert. Those are three guys that expect a certain number of shots, and D'Angelo Russell was the least efficient and effective of all of them. And so it made sense to replace him with a guy who's actually a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter. Conley for his career is much better than D'Lo at catch and shoot 3-pointers. Somebody who can be lower usage, but can knock down a shot if he needs to. And he's also a better on-ball defender, even at his age. So he's really kind of a perfect fit for Minnesota. And of course the Wolves, they have to contend, right? Like they got 5 games worse last year in large part due to the Towns injury, but after acquiring Rudy Gobert and, one of those much talked about stories around the league about how that was a failure. Well, they have to win this year. And by, they acquired Conley at the deadline last year. And so I'd be really surprised if they moved off of Conley. The only way that happens is if it's a dreadful first half of the season and, injuries or whatever. the other thing is there's no other really point guards on the roster. Like the Wolves signed Shake Milton. He's more of a combo guard. Jordan McLaughlin's the only other one. He's kind of a vet minimum type guy. They don't really have a backup plan. Like likely the second unit's going to be ran by Anthony Edwards and Shake Milton. So, yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if they traded Conley. But and actually, that's something else Wolves fans were expecting was a true backup point guard this offseason, and that hasn't happened. So, yeah, I see Conley in a Wolves uniform for all of next season.
Yeah, sounds like the Bucks. They don't really have a backup point guard right now at this point in time as well. So it sounds to me, if I just talk more generally about Minnesota and where the team is at, it sounds like patience perhaps wearing a little thin. There might be some pressure entering this season.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would say, certainly on the head coach, Chris Finch, he was actually hired by the former president of basketball operations, Gerson Rosas, and he's had a working relationship with Tim Connolly elsewhere. They worked together in Denver. So Conley's given him votes of confidence ever since he was hired over a year ago. So I wouldn't say he's like on the hot seat, but if they are, don't make a clear step forward, then I mean, that's the first change. Well, maybe second change. Maybe Karl-Anthony Towns is the first change. I mean, there's a lot of people that think he'll be traded by the deadline if this team's not really, really good in the first half. I think this team has to be kind of a top 4 or 5 team in the West at the deadline in order to avoid that, because Towns Supermax kicks in next summer. And so like you're in this weird kind of mixing of timelines where Anthony Edwards just got his max extension. Towns Supermax kicks in next year. Jaden McDaniels is going to get an extension this offseason. You still have Rudy Gobert in his max contract. So they're going to be paying luxury tax if they don't kind of do something here salary wise, move some pieces around. And also with all the assets they give up for Rudy Gobert, like they need to be better than a 42 win, 8 seed this year. And they need to make some meaningful progress towards 50 wins and home court advantage. I don't think there's any other way that this year could be seen as a success.
Yeah, you already mentioned, and I think it's a bit over the top. And I feel bad, particularly for Rudy Gobert at some point in time, because I just think it gets taken a little bit too far.
Yep.
But while so many teams out there over the course of the last few years might be going the other way and they might be going smaller, the Wolves are doing the opposite. And you've got Kat and you've got Rudy Gobert, and then you sign Naz Reid to a nice little deal as well. So from your perspective, how have you viewed the roster build and the way they've kind of gone all in a way that seems to be trending away from the rest of the league?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate there were a lot of actually, even though the loudest national noise was what are they doing? And I think it's more the assets that they gave up to get Rudy Gobert than it is the actual move. But if you could get past the assets, which I get is a huge part of it, there's something to be said for zigging when everyone else is zagging, or however you want to say that, right? For trying something different and going against small ball and saying like, well, hey, you could argue they have 2 of the best, certainly coming into last year, you could have argued they have 2 of the best 5 centers in the league. You could still make that argument. Obviously Embiid and Jokic being the best 2, but I mean, there aren't that many other centers, maybe Bam Adebayo, that you would say are in that top 5 or 6 center conversation. And one of them happens to be the best, one of the best shooters in the league, period. And one of the top 2 big man shooters of all time in Karl-Anthony Towns. So like offensively, it should work. Defensively is where most of the question marks were. And strangely enough, they were actually a top 10 defense last year, as Rudy Gobert has been like every year of his career. He's been part of a top 10 defense. It was the offense that struggled. And now we're back to the pressure on Chris Finch as supposedly an offensive guru. He had a bottom 10 offense all season for much of the year, bottom 5 offense. And they never really figured it out. Now, Towns missed 53 games. That's 2/3 of the season. So obviously that's the biggest thing we can point to. They changed point guards midway through the season because D'Lo was not compatible with Chris Finch. But I mean, like offensively, they've got to figure something out. I think that they will, because again, Towns is too talented, and when he's healthy, and Gobert, like if he can, it's not that they have Gobert, it's what they gave up to get him. And now it's just like, it's up to the coaching staff to figure it out. And I think that they've got, especially with Anthony Edwards, they've got the right pieces to make it work. But now, because last year was a clear step backwards, again, certainly in part due to injury, but a step backwards, they absolutely have to succeed this year. They have to figure some sort of offensive rhythm out early in the season.
It's going to be interesting. Last one I got for you, just with Kat, and you've referenced it a little bit, and the clear talent that he does have. Where do you sit on the future of Kat in Minnesota?
Yeah, so I spent most of the offseason, we're only about halfway through it, I guess, saying that I thought it was 75-25, 75% that he's on the roster on opening night. I actually feel stronger about that now, but I'm starting to waver a little bit on if he's moved at the deadline. I had Howard back on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said the words he used were he would be shocked if Towns was on the Timberwolves beyond next trade deadline. And at the time, this was, I think, right before the draft or maybe right after, and he was saying, I think it was right before the draft, because he was saying like, hey, he thought it could still happen this offseason. And I've been kind of, I don't know. I think everything coming out of Minnesota, it's likely he stays, that he's part of the team on opening night, because they didn't really get a clear shot at the multiple big thing last year. And they're doubling down on it now with Naz Reid, or tripling down, I guess. So I don't know. I mean, like at this point, sitting here right now, I still think it's more likely than not he's on the team 12 months from now. But there's a lot of people that know a lot about the league and, goings on. And Howard Beck's one of them, who feels like he's likely to be traded. And like I mentioned before, the Supermax kicks in. Towns is going to get paid $52 million next year in 24-25. That's a lot of money. And the Wolves will be in the luxury tax if they don't do some maneuvering. So, I mean, it's easier to trade him before that Supermax kicks in. And the deadline may be the best time to do that. So now if this team goes through the first half and they're the number 2 seed in the West and they're like 30-12 or something crazy like that, they're not going to trade him, obviously. But if they're 500 and struggling, then I think he's gone. I mean, I really do think it depends on how the Timberwolves perform basically through January, whether or not he's on the Wolves past the trade deadline.
Well, I find it fascinating, but we know the Bucks and the Wolves are at least going to play twice, maybe 3 times. Maybe they'll catch up in Vegas, the play-in tournament, or not the play-in tournament, the in-season tournament. Maybe they'll be playing for a little bit of cash in Vegas. Who knows? Ben, I know the Wolves are playing right now, so you probably want to get onto that and catch up with whatever the Summer League Wolves are doing. But it was nice to catch up with you, and hopefully some insightful stuff when it comes to Malik Beasley, and crushing some dreams when it comes to Mike Conley. But we appreciate that, and we enjoy your show over on Locked On Wolves.
Thanks for having me, Kane.
All right, we'll leave it there. Make sure you catch up with Locked On Bucks and Locked On Wolves over the next few days. Summer League continues to roll on. And like I said, subscribe, drop a comment, a like, and all those things, and let us know your thoughts from today's show, whether it's Malik Beasley, Mike Conley, or Kat, or what the Wolves should do with all these big guys on their roster. We appreciate the support. We'll catch you all tomorrow.